had drowned in the ocean, Vladimir, and everything went dark, and I realized I was dead. I was perfectly cognizant of who I was, but I wasn't in my body, and my greatest concern was, where am I going to go?
Welcome to God's Voice Daily. These are the raw phone calls I get every single day. Real people sharing real supernatural encounters. Some of them will go on the main show, God's Voice Today, but every phone call has something worth hearing. And here is today's featured call. Enjoy. Stanley, welcome to God's Voice Daily. So you drowned in the ocean and everything went dark, but then something happened. Tell me more. What happened?
Yes, I had drowned in the ocean, Vladimir, and I realized I was in a lot of trouble because in this riptide jet stream undertow, I was being flipped around like a feather in the air. I could feel the sand scraping my skin, and then exactly what happened was that everything went dark, and I realized I was dead. And I was perfectly cognizant of who I was, but I wasn't in my body, and my greatest concern was, where am I going to go?
Mm. How old were you when that happened, by the way, before we go on?
21 years old.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, it was off the California coast in Newport Beach, and I was just going, wow, I'm 21 years old and I'm dead. And I just got so convicted about even thinking anything about my past, like it's never going to be again. You're dead. And so it's emotional even talking about it, but I said, well, I guess I'm just going to go from this world into the next world. And that's when I heard a voice. The voice said, no, it's not your time. And immediately, three things happened on the speaking of that voice. Was one, I saw a bright light. It was enough for me to open my eyes out of death. I was under the water, and immediately also, upon opening my eyes and seeing the light, I felt an embrace. I wasn't sure what it was. Something had my body. And then I realized that from the momentum and the rapidity of me being carried up, that I was going up. Like if you're in a fast elevator or some kind of a ride in a fairgrounds, and you're, like one of those rides. And then I noticed it was getting lighter and lighter because I knew which way was up, so I could see more and more light coming through the surface. And then when I was just coming out of the water, that same voice said, you can breathe now. And my head came out of the water and I started treading water, and I was actually so far out in the water that I could not see the shore. That greatly concerned me also. And so there's more. I did get back into the shore. That was totally miraculous and supernatural also. I wasn't sure if you wanted to ask me any other questions.
Were you surfing, or what were you doing?
I was attempting to body surf, and I got into this terrible riptide undertow. Yeah, the wave curled upon me, and it knocked all the air out of me, and then I was being driven down, and the sand. I knew that I was towards the bottom because of the sand, but I suppose that the waves may have washed some sand out at the same time.
Stanley, were you a believer then? Did you believe in the afterlife?
No,
Jesus?
At that moment I was not a believer, but when I was almost 5 years old, a neighbor lady told me that Jesus was God and I could ask him into my heart and he'd be my friend, and that's really what I wanted, was a friend. And when I realized that God would be my friend, I asked him into my heart with all sincerity.
At 5?
And I met him then.
Wait, so at 5 years old, you asked God and you met him. You saying you met Jesus?
Yes.
Tell me more about that.
Okay.
But hey, before we jump into that, I'm just a few follow-up questions on the ocean experience. When you heard that voice, what did it sound like to you?
It just said, no, it's not your time.
Was it like a male
It was,
voice? Was it?
yeah,
Where is
to
it
me,
coming
it
from?
sounded like it was not a woman's voice. It was a male voice, It was just very matter of fact,
Stern, kind of firm.
It,
What
it,
what
it
was it
was,
coming from? Was there
yeah,
like a source, or was it like all around?
it was, I was dead. It was within my personhood, because that's when I really realized that we're living souls, and I do expect that we'll forever have our own identity somewhat. So
Mm. Wow. Well, let's go back to 5 years old. So a neighbor, you said, right? A neighbor introduced you to Jesus. Is that what happened?
yes,
Tell me more.
well, I was just about to turn 5 actually, and I had been yearning for a very, very close friend that would be an adult. So I had been watching a television series back, and this is like 1953, and it was called The Lone Ranger. And I just said, I need an adult friend, like either the Lone Ranger or Tonto, and I'm going to find one. So when I met this lady that I ended up in her house, and she told me that that Jesus would be my friend, and that he was God. And I had asked her questions about that. I had already made friends with the man that was we called the mailman. He was the postal man that delivered letters into the house. And then I asked the milkman to be my friend. But when I met her, this unfolded, that when I left her house and started walking back home, just a few houses down the alley to be at my house, Jesus actually met me in the alley when
Whoa.
I started to walk home. Yeah.
What did it look like? Like Jesus that
He looked
we.
like a man that was not an old man, but he came alongside me, and of course I was at about his hip height. I was just 4, almost turning 5, and he stopped in front of me, and I looked up, and there was this man smiling at me, and with a big smile. I had just asked him to be my friend. He actually took me up on it and met me in the alley, and so I was just looking at him before he spoke to me, and I was thinking in myself, I've never seen this man before. He's smiling at me. I know everybody here in the alley and the neighborhood. And as I was looking at him, I thought to myself, I think it's Jesus. So I asked him, Vladimir, I asked him, I said, are you Jesus? And he said, yes, I am. And so the next question that I asked him was, Jesus, why didn't my mother and my father tell me about you? And he
Wow.
said, because they don't want you to know. And that I decided, if my dad didn't want me to know something or do, whatever it was that he didn't want, I was going to keep it to myself, because I didn't want to get spanked.
Huh. Well, interesting. Why did they not want you to know? Is it because, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you come from a Jewish background, right?
Yes,
Is that why?
because they had very much in their understanding, especially the Spanish Inquisition and that kind of thing. A lot of our relatives were in the island of Rhodes that were put to death. I didn't know that until relatively recently, but the Nazis did come into the island of Rhodes. So my father, I can understand why he would act like that. He was threatening to wash my mouth out with soap when the reason I told him that Jesus would help him was because he had suddenly lost his job and didn't know how to pay the bills or how to feed
Mm.
us, which was my brother, sister, and I. How we're going to feed the kids, that type of thing. So I figured I might get in trouble, but I just shoved that all behind me for the love of my father. And I said, he was so distraught. I just said, Father, don't worry, Jesus will help you. And then,
Oh.
yeah, he ran to the sink, grabbed a bar of soap, and
Oh.
yep, I was threatening to wash my mouth out with soap, and I was crying so hard I couldn't breathe. And then the Lord spoke to me and said, Stanley, your mother and father don't understand about me. At a certain time in your life, I will bring you together with people like yourself. that was the promise. And I faced my dad. I said, okay, Daddy. I said, okay. And he put the soap away, didn't wash my mouth out with soap, although he did one time before that. That was enough reason for me to really worry about it.
Wow. That is so interesting that, I mean, I can only imagine. So here's your father, he lost his job. He doesn't believe in Jesus. He's stressed out. And then you come up and you say,
Yeah.
it's just more kind of, insult to
Like,
injury.
I
And,
can laugh about it now and just think of what he was thinking. He says, oh no, my 5-year-old son, the evangelist, it's like,
but I'm curious, how did it end for your mother and father? Did they come to know the Lord?
I'm sure, really, that my mother did. She went on to live. My father died when I was 7.
Mm,
Not sure about him, but he was a good father.
mm,
He had died young due to rheumatic fever, which was not genetic, but it was a fever, rheumatic fever. It was called.
mm. Sorry to hear that. Wow. Man, interesting. So you see Jesus, he speaks to you, he confirms that he is Jesus. And it's interesting because when I had a face-to-face encounter with Jesus, and it wasn't a dream, but it felt like it was like a dream within a dream, because I remember I had to go through this tunnel and all of a sudden I end up in this place and it was just like more real than this life. I remember moving my hands. I remember thinking like, oh my gosh, I'm not in a dream because I can move everything. And I have this encounter with Jesus and I asked the same question. Are you Jesus? And he looked at me and he said, yes, I am Jesus. And the following question, it's interesting, what your question was, why did my parents not tell me about you? But my question was like, well, if you're Jesus, because I was more skeptical, I guess, I don't know. I said, well, tell me what my name is, because Jesus would know. And he told me, he said, your name is Vladimir Viktorovich Prokhnov. He said a full thing. And I just dropped to my knees and I started crying. And I remember him looking at me and he was just puzzled, like, wow, all I said was your name and you already believed me, and crying. And I remember saying, yeah, that's all it took. And we communicated well, I want to say telepathy, but it was like spirit to spirit. It
Yeah.
was that kind of communication. And then he got serious. He looked at me and he said, Vladimir, I have a message for you. And it's interesting that he sandwiched that message. Like, first, he was more concerned about my relationship with my wife. And we just recently got married at that time. This was I've been married for 15 years, but this was 10 years ago. So 5 years into marriage. And he said, there's a great calling over your life, you and your wife. But said, in order for it to come to pass, you guys have to work together. That was number one. And then it said, oh, and by the way, that God's Voice Today podcast you want to start? He said, it's a good thing and I'll help you. And I was like, oh, what about it? Like, oh my gosh, like, he said, don't worry, I'll help you. And then 10 years in the making, he took me through his own school. He sent me to all these different places where I had to learn media and all these different things. And then I thought, Stanley, instantly the next day, I'll have a podcast. How foolish.
Yeah.
10 years.
That's the way I was. I felt instantly that when I was 24 years old, he visited me again and he invited me to a wedding dinner, a wedding party.
Wow.
And personally, and I'll tell you more about that when we have time.
Tell me more now. I want to hear it. You can't just say that and not continue. You got to finish.
Well, actually, so I was lived 4 years on a guided missile destroyer in combat in Vietnam, 2 full combat cruises. By the time I got out, I wasn't religious. Like even though I come from a very religious family, and when I got out, I had these aspirations to find the truth strongly, and I was keeping this Shabbat and keeping kosher and all this, and I just felt like I still wasn't at that point. See, I think subconsciously, having met him personally as a child, always remained with me. For sure, it did. And so one Erev Shabbat, I was doing some charity work with trying to balance out with the things that I did wrong by doing good deeds. And I realized it wasn't really giving me that deep, deep understanding and joy that I needed. So I was crying and crying and crying. And I said, God, I don't really think you care about me. And soaking my pillow with tears. And I said, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I really don't think you care about me. And I heard a voice at that very moment that said, are you serious? And I went, what? Where'd that come from? And I just paused. And then there was a slight pause, and I heard his voice again. It said, would you like me to show you why I'm asking you if you're serious? And that was enough for me. I knew that I really didn't want God to be fully in charge of my life, and I didn't know what I was going to do. And then from down deep, I knew that He loved me, and I knew I needed a mediator between myself and God, because I had been into different meditations and the Eastern religion, this, that, and the other thing. And so I cried out to Him, and He calmed me. I felt the presence of God, and then I fell asleep. And then a week later, that's when I was awakened in my sleep, and there was 3 men in my room, and one of them came forward, and they said, your prayers have been heard. Your name is written in the book. We're here to invite you to a wedding dinner. And then they wanted to know, would I accept the invitation or not? And I was just kind of going, wow, what is this? What's going on? I don't know anything about this. I did.
So what does it mean?
By the grace of God. What was the last thing you said?
So what happened next? By you accepting?
Well, I asked him when I'd find out more about this wedding party, and he said Sunday, the 9th of December. It was 1973. It was actually just before the Yom Kippur War of 73 broke out, and then providentially, he told me Sunday, December 9th, I'd find out more about it. And so I met people, things providentially were happening. I moved to a different house, and there's a lot of detail to it. But I met some believers, some Jewish believers, and then they led me into understanding, and I started reading the Brit Hadashah, and I wasn't believing just from the New Testament. I had to see it all in the Torah, the Ketuvim, and the Nevi'im, in the Tanakh. I had to see it. And that was a long time ago.
Wow. Man, Stanley, the more I learn about you, the more questions I have. There's so many interesting...
We need to talk. I'd rather talk to you more.
No, it sounds like we might have to do a proper couple hours just to dive in. Hey, before we get back to the episode, I want to thank today's sponsor. Instead of businesses, listeners like you can now sponsor an episode of God's Voice Daily. And today's episode is sponsored by a listener who shared this message. Dedicated to my son, Johnny. May he find truth in Jesus. Amen. Thank you for helping me make this episode possible. If you'd like to sponsor an episode, just go to godsvoicetoday.com/support. And now let's get back to the episode. Well, Stanley, before we disconnect, for everyone watching and listening, what are some practical things people can do, 1 or 2 things, to hear God clear in this day and age?
Mm-hmm. Well, you first must believe that God is, and that He's God, and that He's good, and that He's a rewarder of those that diligently seek Him. That's your God. And you need to come to the place where realistically and in truth, come to the point where you don't have any better options than the God of all creation, who gave His only Son, the Messiah, as an atonement and a propitiation for our sins. and call out upon him. Call out upon the God of Moses. Study the Torah. He spoke of the Messiah. This is, so, and then draw near to him through his words. And as Joshua and Caleb were told when Moses had already died, do not let these words depart out of your mouth, and you should meditate on them day and night, for these words are our life. It's the words of life.
Amen. Love all of that. And for people that want to get a hold of you, is there an easy way to get in touch with you online, or maybe social media, anything like that?
Maybe what we should do is go through maybe you and see at first.
Sounds good. All right. Well, if you want to get in touch with Stanley, you reach out to me, Vladimir@godsvoiceday.com, and I'll make sure to connect you with Stanley. Well, Stanley, thank you so much.
You too.
For scheduling the phone call. It's been a real pleasure. I know I had an opportunity to talk to you months ago, but it's awesome to finally reconnect again, and we'll stay in touch. Hey, thank you so much for watching. Before you go, I have another powerful supernatural encounter for you that you cannot miss. It should be on the screen right now. And don't forget, this is a daily podcast. Every single day, I publish a brand new episode, a brand new testimony. So subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next video.